Welcome back, Hornets. We are ready for another Ready Reading Workbook lesson. Today we're going to be on page 137. We're looking at lesson 13A on page 137. So if you don't have your Ready Workbook out and you don't have a writing utensil, take a minute, pause the video, and make sure you have your materials. Okay, once you've got your materials out, let's go ahead and get started. So, like I said before, this is 13A, and today we're going to be doing part one. The title of this lesson is Analyzing the Impact of Word Choice. So, the first thing we need to do is box in the title of our lesson. All right. Now that I've boxed in the title of my lesson, I'm going to rewrite the title of my lesson up at the top of the workbook page. And our title, once again, is Analyzing the Impact of Word Choice. All right, so next we need to go ahead and start breaking apart our title so we can figure out what this lesson is all about and get an idea of what we're going to be doing. So let's look at this word analyzing first. Analyzing means that we're going to break it down to take a closer look at it. So underneath analyzing, I'm going to write breakdown. So next, this word impact is going to focus on the effect of something or how something is influenced by another. So underneath that, I'm going to write influence or effect. Okay. And next, we're going to look at this word choice. So this kind of goes along what we've been doing the past couple of weeks, but we're going to take it even further this time. So word choice itself refers to what the author means. So when the author is writing in a text, they're going to use their word choice to get their ideas across. And they're going to get their ideas across to the reader in a variety of ways. So they can get their ideas across using figurative language, connotative language, different sound devices, as well as different literary devices. And we have taken notes on all of these, so this should not be anything new to you. Figurative language, remember, guys, focuses on metaphor, simile, personification. We've got hyperbole, all of those different types of figurative language is how the author expresses ideas in creative ways, often with comparisons. Connotative language focuses on the feeling behind the words. And then we're going to look at sound devices too. Remember some of our sound devices. We have onomatopoeia, alliteration. And then we have our literary devices such as hyperbole, idiom, imagery, things like that. They're tricks the author uses to give us special effects. So anytime we are thinking about different type of language or devices, we have to make sure that we focus on tone and whether or not the tone of the text is positive, negative, or neutral. We also look at tone for word choice, not we look at the overall tone of the text, but sometimes we have to break it down even further and just look at the tone of specific words to make sure we understand what the author means, and whether or not they have a positive, negative, or neutral attitude toward the subject of their writing. And sometimes we also have to look at that specific word choice and determine whether or not it is strong or weak. Okay, so now that we have broken apart our title, pretty good, let's look at our standard right here, and I'm going to box that in. So, this is the standard we are focusing on for lesson 13A. It's RL 7.4, and it says that we are going to analyze the impact of specific word choice. So, for example, alliteration on meaning and tone. So, we're really going to focus on meaning and tone in this lesson. And I want us to think about this. Whenever we mention word choice, we know we're gonna analyze the impact of word choice. So, what is word choice? Well, word choice is that figurative language, connotative language, sound devices, literary devices that the author chooses to use to evoke feelings in the reader. So, I'm gonna make myself a note down here that says word choice evokes feelings in the reader. Okay, so if you look over here, this tells us the theme of lesson 13A. So we know every text that we're going to look at is going to have to do with a sense of belonging. So the characters potentially are going to try to see where they fit in, where they belong. So the theme of everything we're going to look at is a sense of belonging. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is look at this little introduction paragraph up at the top and see what it says. So it's telling us that authors choose words and phrases to create the meaning and tone of a text. So when it says meaning, it's talking about the ideas the author is trying to express. So it's going to create the meaning and the tone of a text. And we already have a definition for tone, but let's look at it again because it's bolded. So, tone is an author's attitude toward a subject. Authors create meaning and tone by using words in different ways. So, the author is going to create the meaning, so the idea they're trying to express, and tone, which is their attitude, how they feel about the subject, in a variety of ways. So, down below, we have 3 bullet points. These 3 different bullet points are some ways the authors can create meaning and tone. So, you have taken source book notes on these by now. So we're going to take a little time, break these 3 apart and really look at them. So these 3 I will go ahead and tell you, all of these are different types of sound devices. So you may be thinking that sound devices can only be used in poetry. Well, that's not the case. Sound devices can be used really in any type of literature. We're going to be looking at a few examples in this lesson, and none of them are going to be poetry. So, sound devices can be used in other types of texts beside poetry. So, don't forget that. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is repetition. So, repetition. We know repetition means something's going to be repeated. So, let's look at what it says. It says the repetition of words and phrases provides extra emphasis. So if something is providing emphasis, we know that it's getting attention brought to it. And we have an example of words and phrases being repeated. So let's look at this example it gives us. It says, together we are united, together we are strong, together we are victorious. So if you'll notice, in this sentence, we have the phrase together we are being repeated. So, together we are united, together we are strong, together we are victorious. Together we are is being repeated. So, that repeated phrase, together we are, it's very simple, but it's also strong. So, it's a simple phrase, but it's strong and it emphasizes unity. This is our key word, unity, and conveys a powerful tone. So, the idea the author's trying to get across is a feeling of unity. They want us to understand that they are united. I mean, we know that because he keeps repeating, together we are. So if you are together, it's you plus others, right? You are not alone. So it's emphasizing unity and it conveys a powerful tone. And we know that word powerful has very strong connotation. So let's move on to alliteration and look at what it says about alliteration. So, alliteration is the repetition of the initial consonant sounds in close words or stressed syllables. So, the repetition, once again, repeating, we know repetition means repeating that initial consonant sound in close words or stressed syllables. When it says close words, it means that words that are close to one another in a text. So, some consonant sounds are very hard and create a strong or urgent tone. So, when it says, whenever you have a hard consonant sounds, it means like k, k. That's like a hard consonant sound. Um, on the other hand, you have some that are very soft. We have those soft consonant sounds that create a soft or peaceful tone, and it has a couple of examples for us to look at. So, our example of the hard consonant sounds that creates a strong or urgent tone would be come quickly, but keep quiet. So that beginning k sound is what's being repeated. So come quickly, but keep quiet. So next let's go back to our soft consonant sound. So slip silently into sleep. That sound at the beginning is what's being repeated here. So you may be thinking that if they have the same beginning letter, they're going to have the same sound. Well, that's not true. If you think about our alliteration, that we sometimes use, Sally sells seashells, those all begin with S, but they have different sounds. That S doesn't always make the same sound. So I'm gonna make myself a note out here that says just because has the same beginning letter does not mean that it has the same beginning sound. Okay, so just because it has the same beginning letter does not mean that it has the same beginning sound. You have to go through it and make sure that the sound is the same. If the sound is not the same, it's not alliteration because alliteration is that repetition of the initial consonant sound. So if it doesn't have that um same sound, it's not alliteration. All right, so let's move on to assonance. This one's kind of new for us. All right, so assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds. So we've already talked about the repetition of consonant sounds, and now assonance is our repetition of our vowel sounds. So long vowel sounds are open. So we have hope, opened in her soul. So that O sound, that is an open vowel sound that's being repeated. So open vowel sounds can create a soft, eerie, or light tone. And this word eerie here means kind of creepy, maybe even a little suspicious, right? So short vowel sounds, on the other hand, are closed and tight. So for example, if we miss this, it will be over. So that I sound, if we miss the is, it will be over. So that I sound is our short vowel sound that's being repeated. Short vowel sounds can create a tense or sharp or dark tone. So it's very interesting to me how the repetition of either a consonant or a vowel sound can create a tone all on its own. You wouldn't initially expect just the repetition of a sound to be able to do that, but it can. And that's what's very unique about repetition with alliteration and assonance. So, this just normal repetition and alliteration and assonance all have something in common. They all function to create unity within a text. So, all repetition creates unity within a text. So, this is very important. We've got to make sure we understand this. Any type of repetition that you have in a text is there because it is making the text united. So it is there to make sure that it works in unity, and it's there to make sure that the overall meaning, it contributes to the overall meaning and the tone of the text. And don't forget, we have our normal repetition, which is just the repetition of words and phrases, but we have alliteration and assonance. Those are just different types of repetition. It's still repeating. Anything that's repeating is repetition. And it's all there to focus on the unity of the text. It's all there to work together to get across that meaning and that tone. All right, so now that we have looked at our intro, we have broken down repetition, alliteration, and assonance. Let's move on down the page to our directions. So we have to read this quote from the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you don't know F. Scott Fitzgerald, he is the one who wrote The Great Gatsby. That's one of my favorite books. So we have to read this quote from him. And as we read the quote, we have to look for repeating words and sounds. So we're going to practice finding these repeated words and sounds. So I want you to read the quote once just for understanding, and then we're going to come back and look for repeating words and sounds. So let's read it once for understanding, and then we'll come back and read it to find our repeating words and sounds. So I'll read it to you, and I want you to follow along. That is part of the beauty of all literature. You discover that your longings are universal longings, that you're not lonely and isolated from anyone. You belong. Okay, so next, let's look and see what is being repeated. We're looking for repeating words and sounds, so both. So I'm going to give you just a second to go through this and see if you can find some repetition, repeating words and repeating sounds, and we'll come back and go over it together. All right, so I'm assuming that you're back. I'm ready to see what you have found. So let's go ahead and discuss. So let's look at the quote one more time. That is part of the beauty of all literature. You discover that your longings are universal longings, and you're not lonely and isolated from anyone. You belong. All right, so the first thing I noticed, we have let's look at our word repetition first. That's going to be the easiest for us to do. We have the repetition of this word you. We have this word you being used in two separate places. So that word you is being repeated. And also here it says your. It has the word you in it, right? So you, your, you. That's being repeated. Is it anywhere else? Oh yeah, right down here. I almost missed that one. So you, your, you are, and then you, all being repeated. So that's some word repetition. So do we have any other words being repeated? Any other or parts of a word that you've noticed? I noticed here we have this word longings, long being repeated. So longings, and belong, which still has that long in it. So I'm going to underline that. So we have those words being repeated for us. So now let's look for some sounds that are being repeated. So first, let's look at our consonant sounds. Let's look for our consonant sounds being repeated. So one that I noticed a lot of was this little L sound being repeated in all literature. And then it's again with this longings, and then it's in universal. We've got that little sound, and it's there again. And then we have the little sound in lonely. It's an isolated as well. Um, and then we also have it in belong, this L sound. So there is a lot of that that L sound being repeated. So let's look for some vowel sounds that are being repeated as well. So we have in this word you, I noticed this one a bunch, the ooh sound being repeated. That's a ooh, that's our vowel sound, right? That's in you. It's also in universal, right there with that you. Um, in the your, that's being repeated. Um, where else? Right there again with our you. So all of those different sounds are being repeated. So there are quite a few that we could pick out. This is a very repetitive quote with our words and our sounds. So now that we have picked out a few, let's move on down the page and see what it's telling us to do. It says to reread the quote, underline repeated words. Oh, we did this already. And circle letters that show alliteration and assonance. So we did that. So we underlined our repeated words. Then we circled our letters that show alliteration and assonance. So we did that. So we're good. So, next, we have to consider how these choices impact the text's meaning and tone. So, we're focusing on meaning and tone. And remember, don't forget, tone is the author's attitude toward the subject they're writing about. So, we've got to consider those two things, meaning and tone. And then we're going to compare your thoughts to the chart below. So, what do you think? How do you think these choices impact the text's meaning and tone? Well, let's go ahead and look down and see what our chart says. So the chart is broken up into three columns, three rows. Our first column focuses on our device. So these are different types of sound devices, word repetition, alliteration, assonance. And then we have our example from the Fitzgerald quote. And then we have the impact on meaning or tone. So what this is focused on is how the word choice affects the meaning or tone. So we're looking for the impact, but we're looking at how the word choice affects the meaning or tone. So I'm going to make myself a note of that. That's how the word choice affects meaning and tone. All right. So let's go ahead and look at our first column, which is about word repetition. Okay. So it gives us some examples and we picked these out. So we already knew these. We looked at them in our quote, but here they are for us. So we've got you, your, you are, you. So we picked those out. We have you here, and then we have your, you are, and right there, you. So all of those, that you, your, and you, those are all being repeated. So I'm going to underline those. That's all one example of repetition right there. So we also have longings and belong. So all of those are being repeated too, and it's focused on that long sound. So longings, we picked those out too in our quote. So we have longings, and then we have longings there, and we have belong there. So that's another example of word repetition. So now we have to figure out the impact on meaning or tone. So, how the author's word choice affects the overall meaning and tone for the quote. So, let's see what it says. It says the repetition of different forms of you puts the focus on the reader. So, whenever they use that word you, we know that that is second person and it's the speaker talking directly to the reader. So, we know that in this quote, which is by Fitzgerald, Fitzgerald is talking directly to us because he uses that word you. So, the repetition of this you sound really lets us know that he is focused on us as the reader. So the repetition of longings and belong